read a journal entry that I wrote last night in preparation for today. And if the picture is available, we can put it up. The lady pictured here is Dicey Young. She was born on a plantation in South Carolina in 1824. South Carolina law at the time allowed for slaves to be freed through an act called manumission. This typically applied to slaves whose masters died and left paperwork for their freedom. This happened for Dicey Young and the unborn baby girl that she carried. As a free woman of color, Dicey found her way to a little town in northern Florida named Madison. There, she gave birth to a little girl named Lila. The two worked as field slaves until their deaths. That little girl, Lila, eventually married, and her husband had a baby boy named Moses. Moses eventually married, and he and his wife had a daughter named Laura. Laura was my great-grandmother. She died when I was 25. I can tell you the story of Dicey Young because of my great-grandmother and her influence on my life. She told me the stories of her past so that I can know and appreciate where I came from, and more importantly, to understand the path that I would eventually take in life. To minimize my story, or to forget the ugly parts, would be to minimize who I am, and more importantly, minimize who God is and what He's done in my life. I am who I am because God says so, period. When I began to research my family history and map out my past, it was uncomfortable and quite frankly was very, very painful for me. I struggled with the reality of my life, of the life that my ancestors faced, and I cried when I understood all that they had endured. The things I read in history books and the narratives I read became very real to me. Even the thought of sharing today made me extremely uncomfortable. I didn't want to talk about slavery. It's ugly, it's painful, but it's a part of my story. The reality is, talking about race, culture, and diversity is very hard. These are things we think about all the time, but we are afraid to talk about them. We fear rejection, we fear conflict, we fear what we can't control. But the truth is, everyone in here has a story. That story is valid and real and raw and probably ugly in some parts. But that is how God gets His glory. I believe God has called us to embrace the ugly parts of our story so that He can get His glory. Not us, Him. And so I have 4 things I'm going to challenge all of us to kind of meditate on and maybe perhaps act upon as we move through this life together. First, we need to dismiss the presuppositions, which are ideas and assumptions that we have about people who don't look like us, talk like us, or act like us. Those judgments are not of God. Revelation 7:9 reminds us that people from every nation, tribe, and tongue will praise God at His throne. Next, we need to embrace each other. We shouldn't ostracize people because they're different or not what we would consider normal. Galatians 3:28 and Romans 1:16 remind us that race and culture do not separate us in the eyes of God. Learning and experiencing other cultures and traditions can actually glorify the Lord's creation. And it builds community and respect and can ultimately bring others to Christ. Third, we need to have some conversations. The face-to-face, intentional conversations where we listen and we learn and we ask questions to get answers and clarification. It's not always about the debate or even the argument. When it comes to these most sensitive issues, it's about the person with the story, and ultimately it's about glorifying God. You may not even end up agreeing with the person you're talking to, but it's all about learning and growing together. Finally, and this probably is the most important one for you guys, social media is not the place to get on the soapbox and get brave with our thoughts. If what we post we wouldn't be brave enough to have a face-to-face conversation about, we should keep it to ourselves. Period. If we cannot put ourselves in a place of vulnerability and uncomfortableness, to have a face-to-face conversation with someone, what we have to say is not that important. And for everyone else, it's not worth the like, share, follow, or retweet. Talking about race and culture and diversity is not comfortable. It probably will never be. But those who are truly willing to have that uncomfortable conversation about someone else's journey or story, or someone who is willing to go dig for understanding, is one truly looking to glorify God. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much for each person sitting in this room today. I thank you that they're beautifully and wonderfully made in your image. I pray that we are brave enough to get to know each other for what makes us unique, instead of distancing ourselves because of our differences. Please open up opportunities for us to walk out our faith authentically by honoring each other's stories, and help us to be uncomfortable so that we can bring you glory. In Jesus Christ's name I do pray. Amen. And, Ladies first. Ladies first.